This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London.
Okay, welcome back. Having made a fascinating start already to the day, we move on to a wonderful panel now on trends in research on 21st century fiction, but also about newer forms of writing online from Latin America. And we're going to follow the same format with the papers delivered first, followed by questions at the end. And our first speaker is María López from London Metropolitan University, where she is a lecturer in Hispanic Studies and Sociology. Her research interests lie in the area of Hispanic literatures, particularly in terms of sexual identities, power, diaspora, social cohesion and identity. She's currently working on a book-length project, I understand contracted with Tamasis, which is on homophobia, resistance and power in revolutionary Cuba. And she's going to be giving us an inkling of that, I think, today in her presentation.
Hello, and it's a real pleasure to talk about literature for all of us, I think. This is a presentation which I've taken from the last chapter in a book, and I've just selected some topic and some concepts in order to go through them and prove my thesis, which is basically that homosexuality still is used in Cuban literature today as a destabilizing weapon, if you want, against the revolutionary system. So I'll go through first a bit of, because I didn't know what kind of audience I would have in front of me, I decided to make a bit of introduction about the institutionalized homophobia, as it's called, in Cuba, which, thank God, it finished, almost finished now, at least on the official side. And it was particularly strong and harsh during the 1960s and 70s, and a bit even in the 80s in Cuba. Inspired all these writers, of course, and I just focused my presentation in two writers, Pedro, Juan, Gutiérrez, and Leonardo, Padura, Fuentes. But in the actual chapter, I will talk about Wendy Guerra or Ana Lucía Portela, which are, you know, two Cuban writers, very famous writers. So what I've done first is do a bit of introduction, a bit of contextualization, history contextualization of the homosexuality or homophobia in Cuba, and going through the main concepts. And then I will go into the analysis, brief analysis, of two of the main characters, the main homosexual characters in El Rey de La Habana and in a tale, Látigo, Mucho Látigo, which is included in Trilogía Sucia de La Habana, by Pedro, Juan, Gutiérrez. I think I made a reference to another tale. And in Leonardo, Padura, Fuentes' renowned novel Máscaras. So homosexuality, what I've done in this chapter is basically approach the issue of homosexuality in revolutionary Cuba from a social construction. This the result of social construction, this sociological methodology in order to approach an issue. Basically, it's based on the idea of authority, because dictates in the past. So the idea of homophobia comes from above. That's what social construction says. That homosexuality was a social problem and a pathology to be solved and treated. So these are main concepts which are present, as we'll see, in the literature, in Cuban literature today. And also, homosexuals were marginals. So these ideas, being a social problem, a pathology solved, that need to be solved, treated, the were marginals, condemned homosexuals to live within the margins of censorship, exile, and invisibility. And homosexuality was approached like a stigma, and I'm using here Goffman's text, Goffman concept, the book, the famous book, Stigma. So heterosexuals were entitled to protect and prevent sexual child abuse. They were entitled to protect themselves from a homosexual. That was the idea of homosexuality and homosexual in general terms in Cuba at that time. I'm referring to the 60s, 70s, 80s, and even 90s, I think. Homosexuals were accused of being extravagant, and here I took this term because I want to make reference to the main idea in Manuel Falla's great documentary about Renaldo Arenas, Seres Extravagantes, which I'm sure most of you have seen, which was made in 2004. And I think the title, and I'm talking with Manuel, the title was reflected very much what he wanted to say and how homosexuals were portrayed in this revolutionary concepts. But what is to be extravagant? What is being extravagant? It is strange, eccentric, outstanding. So this idea, that idea is going to be central in Cuban literature today, as we'll see. So, well, I just went through very briefly. This is lovely Leonardo. Politics of Homosexuality. Brad Epps talks about that in his article. He gave this title, Proper Conduct, Leonardo, Fidel Castro, and the Politics of Homosexuality. So there was a politics on homosexuality, how to treat homosexuals under the special circumstances of revolutionary regime. So they created the famous UMAPs, concentration camps, or campos de trabajo. Depending on who you talk to, they will refer to one side or the other. Congress of Education and Culture in 1971, they decide preventing and educational methods against homosexuals very clearly. Fidel Castro talked about that. The Penal Code in 1979 revamped this idea. This is Spanish Ley de Vagos y Maleantes. They created this law against homosexuals. So from that moment on, homosexual, or those suspicious to be homosexuals, could be taken to prison. If the police decided they were suspicious of being homosexual, abnormal species. All these ideas, which are also put in capital letters, is for you to, have a clear idea of how they were portrayed from the official side in relation to this social construction thing. So that was what happened during the 1970s, 80s. It very much relapsed with the Penal Code in 1988, cancelled the provision that anyone who engaged in homosexual acts in public or private should be charged with 3 to 9 months sentence, although it retains the public decency cause. And then what happens is the some writers very shyly started to publish their works, or in other words, their works were accepted in Cuba in the formal side. For instance, I think it was a very good example, Jorge Espinosa, books of poems, Las Breves Tribulaciones, which included poem Vestido de Novia, which was clearly homosexual focused, was awarded with the Premio Nacional de Poesía in Caimán Barburo. So they started, the homosexual characters started to appear in Cuban literature. Or Roberto Urias, short story, Porque llora Leslie Caro. Very, very shyly they started to appear. In the 1990s, a movement towards reconciliation. And there are many ideas about that and the reasons why the Cuban government decided to move towards and allow these people to be part of the revolutionary portrait. In 1992, I find this very interesting and very funny. Fidel Castro looks at to justify the government's homophobic politics, blaming the Spanish people, blaming the Spain, of course, why not? I mean, we're here to that. Machismo has been part of the idiosyncrasy of our people for centuries, and it has multiple origins, from the Arab influence of Spain to other influences of Spanish themselves. Fine, thank you very much, because we absorbed machismo from conquerors, of course, just as we absorbed many of other habits, yeah? So we started to face the problem. So they moved from invisibility, just ignored, you don't exist, I put you into prison, I pretend you don't exist. In Frankie's book, Frankie says, well, I was with Fidel Castro and I asked him, are there homosexuals in Cuba? And he said, there are no homosexuals in Cuba. They were with the national people, the people coming from abroad. And Fidel said, there are not homosexuals in Cuba. We don't have homosexuals. Invisibility, they don't exist. I pretend they don't exist. However, I create all these laws against them to prevent their presence, if you want, but they don't exist. By 1992, he says, well, actually, they do exist, but it's not us. We didn't create these homophobic laws. We just inspired some people. In 1990, towards getting foreign literature and all these books and who are pieces of theater, drama, pieces like El Lobo, El Bosque, El Hombre Nuevo, then the famous, renowned film Fresa y Chocolate, Atilio Esteves fue desnudo frente a la ventana in 1990, Ana Lucía Portela, Book of Stories, Una extraña entre las piedras, much later in 1990s, o Padura Fuentes, short story, El Cazador, and the book La Puerta de Alcalá y otras cacerías. So there is a homosexual boom, if you want. And 2000, many things happened. Very briefly, 2008, the state subsidized sex change operation. I think the big change came with it, Centro Nacional de Educación, the creation of the STEM sex, raise awareness about the homophobic prejudices and prevent the population from contracting AIDS. Fidel Castro nephew. She is the director of the sex. I think they are doing incredible work, trying to make people aware of the danger with AIDS and trying to normalize the situation with homosexuals and publicize their interest in normalizing the situation. Also, the intelligentsia is allowed to travel, or the intellectuals are allowed to travel and work more in foreign universities, give lectures. This everything is happening in 2000. Until here, 2010, Fidel Castro publicly assumed all responsibility for the persecution of homosexuals during the first 3 decades of the revolutionary government in an interview with a Mexican newspaper. So he moved and said, yeah, it's me. You need to blame, no need to blame Spanish people anymore, just blame me. 13 August 2011, Fidel Castro's 85th birthday took place, the first wedding between 2 people of the same sex in Cuba, although the union las uniones homosexuales o las familias homoparentales are not represented in the Cuban census yet, but they are very close to normal. So there's been a change in the mentality and a change in the forms of the Cuban government towards inclusion of homosexuals. Now, going into literature, what do homosexuals represent in Cuban literature? I'm just going to focus on 3 homosexual characters. Sandra, which is the transsexual in El Rey de la Habana. Roberto, which is the homosexual character in Látigo Mucho Látigo, which is a short story included in Trilogía Sucia de la Habana, and Alexis Arayán and Alberto Marquez, who are the 2 homosexual characters in Leonardo, Padura, Fuentes. For me, and that's why I tried to prove in my chapter, homosexuals in Cuba still today, and regardless, the change in mentality and also the politics of the government represent in these novels and the loose end in a system that carefully plans social order. And I would add here, social control. The dramatic stories show evidence of the mistakes of the Cuban system in the past. So again, they are kind of destabilizing weapon against this social control, this social order that revolutionary government still tried to prevent. So I made a kind of structure for you to follow. So in El Rey de la Habana and in Látigo Mucho Látigo, we have from Pedro Juan Gutiérrez, we have a portrait of homosexuality or homosexuals, and I based my analysis in 3 elements. I based them in much more, but just decided to bring these 3 to this presentation. So Pedro Juan Gutiérrez tells the story of the marginals, and I was very careful when choosing this word, using realismo sucio. What happens in Pedro Juan Gutiérrez stories is that the characters are so concerned about surviving and getting fed, getting food in order to survive one more day. They don't have time to think, rethink, debate on culture, national identity, what am I, what I'm not, my past, my present, my future, the future of the island. Nothing. They don't talk about anything apart from what are you going to eat, how are we going to survive today. While in Máscaras de Padura Fuentes, he tells a story of the marginals, but he's making certain concessions, which are called concessions. He, Padura, is making una literatura del desencanto. He is the new man, the heterosexual, the revolutionary, is disappointed with the system. He's sad, disappointed. He feels nostalgia. He reflects a lot about culture, sense of belonging, who are we, who am I, what I've become. They reflect because they've got things to eat, basically. Pedro Juan, he's going to tell the story, the unofficial history of Cuba, based on these homosexual characters who are going to live in guaridas, which is the symbol of resistance, Again, pay attention to the concept of resistance, guarida. We can see that in Fresa y Chocolate very clearly, this guarida, this idea of I live in a flat where I create a parallel universe, where I can survive, I resist the constraints imposed from outside. While exactly the same happens in Mascara. The big account, the big events related to the homosexuals and heterosexuals happen within a flat in Habana Vieja or Centro Habana, in Guarida, Again, a symbol of resistance. So you can see how homosexuals are portrayed as a stabilizing element. We need to reduce them, we need to ignore. So life is happening outside, and then in this kind of flat, Guaridas, the true story, the true and official story of Cuba is happening. And then the impact in the heterosexual. The big impact happens in Padura Fuentes, more than in Pedro, Juan, Gutiérrez. Why? Because of this. These characters don't have memory, they don't remember. They just need to move on in order to survive and see what's going to happen next. Here, there is a huge impact in Conde, which represents the new man, and it's going to destabilize him, as we'll see. He being the representative of the all-new man and of the revolutionary man. Gutiérrez tells the story of the marginals using realism. This is at the back of the Trilogía Sucia de La Habana. Él lo dice, esta es la historia de los sin voz. So he's giving voice to those who don't have voice in this revolutionary thing. The red thing is mine, okay, it's not Pedro. Los que tienen que arañar la tierra cada día para buscar algo de comer, hunger. No tienen tiempo ni energía para nada más. Certainly not to reflect on culture or sense of belonging or anything. Su objetivo único es sobrevivir, no culture, sense of belonging. Como sea, de cualquier modo, ni ellos mismos saben por qué ni para qué, se empecinan en sobrevivir un día más. Solo eso, right? So that would be the ethos of Pedro Juan Gutiérrez characters. In Coger el toro por las astas, that's right, that's the other tale I was gonna, I analyze in my essay, but I just took this fragment, this quote for you, because it very much explains what I was trying to say. That's the main character talking. Me sentía muy vacío, como si no tuviera ni tripas, ni mierda, ni corazón, ni nada. Estaba vacío, ligero. So he doesn't, no memory. Caminaba automáticamente y pensaba con lucidez. Tienes que coger el toro por las astas, Pedro Juan. Tienes que dejarte de blandenguerías y ponerte fuerte. Te pones bien fuerte, te plantas ante el toro, lo agarras por los cuernos y no puedes dejar que te derribe. Surviving. O no, lo vences tú, te volteas de lado y ya sigues feliz. Hasta que aparezca el próximo toro y comience a darte cornadas y otra vez tienes que ponerte muy duro y derribarlo. Es así. So life is like that. Right? So no concessions, no Padura's concessions about reflecting on things, the past, cultural identity, national identity, revolution and stuff. They tell the unofficial history of, on the basis of La Guarida. Well, Guarida provides a parallel and private universe where the marginal and stigmatized interact freely with no constraints. So people, and we'll see that with the maskers, Pedro Fuentes, take away the mask and behave and conduct themselves as they really are. Essential concepts when analyzing conversations were silence and anxiety. Chapter 2 in my book is, chapter 3 actually, is the analysis of Fresa y Chocolate from a written testimony and Padura's written testimony, and I think I will. And I very much reflect not only on the conversations happening in the Guarida, but we need to reflect on the silences, how they are silent, what they mean, how there is a parallel conversation between characters by not talking. And it's very much relates, and those of you who are familiar with the Cuban system, silences are very important because they have not been allowed to talk until recently. In Látigo, mucho Látigo, a place for the unofficial, I just selected this quote in relation to La Guarida. Let's see how Pedro Juan is portraying the Guarida, o el apartamento de Roberto, who is the homosexual character. El apartamento de Roberto está bien protegido con rejas de barrotes gruesos y candados macizos. Es como vivir en una cárcel. So that's how the revolutionary government is bringing into the portrait of the Cuban Revolution the gay characters. Yeah? So that's what I was referring to. Es como vivir en una cárcel. Isolation. Roberto tiene cientos de adornos de porcelana europea y china, objetos de jade, de marfil coloreado y bronces. y todo antiguo legítimo de excedente factura es un noun. Let's going to see how he, the Pedro Juan, the new man, the revolutionary man, yeah, impúdico, cínico, pervertido, stigma, y loca, muy loca. That's how he is going to portray that. Sandra, who is a homosexual character, embodies a contradiction in that una mujer bellísima y al mismo tiempo parece un hombre bellísimo. So he's going to be a contradiction. Sandra challenges Ray. Ray is the heterosexual character, understanding of sexual order. So let's kind of see how the revolutionary character or the heterosexual character reflects on his own sexuality. Ray fue a rechazarla, pero ya se sabe lo intensamente débil y picadora que es la carne. Sandra es una experta moviéndose, provocando. En la tercera vuelta, Ray se fijó en que ella tenía un buen animal erecto entre las piernas, casi tan grande como él, pero él era un hombre y no le gustaba aquello. So he is moved by this, and then challenges the revolutionary sexual gender ethos. Yo soy un hombre, cojones. Ay, sí, todos sois hombres, por desgracia. Qué aburrido. Por desgracia, ni tarro. A mí me gusta ser hombre. Ay, no te hagas, que aquí el que no canta la vaya mesa, la tararea. Very briefly, with Padura Fuentes, again, I'm just going to go into this challenge, the revolutionary portrayed in his novel. So this is how it works. So we have the official Cuba, portrait of official Cuba, with those accepted, if you want, by the system. We have the policeman with a high sense of sensitivity and disappointment. Faustino Rayan, which is the government employee, so he's going to criticize, but he's going to criticize all these high institutional and bureaucracy, and he assassinates in order to preserve the order. Alberto Marquez, who is a typical homosexual, very much reflecting Diego in Fresa y Chocolate and in El Lobo, el Bosque, el Hombre Nuevo. He's the victim of physical and ideological invisibility and exercising memory and sense of belonging, and this is the young homosexual, the new generation, suffering ostracism and death, and one is gonna destabilize the other. Yeah? Revelation of the masks. What does it mean? Why Padura decided to name the book Máscaras? Because it unmasks the current prejudices against homosexuals and the constraints and the moral constraints hidden behind. This is, I'm just going to go through very quickly. Alberto Marquez, resisting ostracism and a weapon against the system. That's how Padura Fuentes is going to, or the heterosexual is going to refer to the homosexual. Resistió todas las penurias, pero se quedó aquí, aunque solo sea para ver la suerte final de los infames que lo hostilizaron. Es que él pide, al menos, la reivindicación de la venganza for all those years, aunque es incapaz de transformarla en actos físicos o ofensas púdicas. Again, challenging the concept of cowardly courage. Pues la verdad es que ese maricón que se caga de miedo, si le dan un grito, tiene unos cojones que le llevan a los tobillos. Aguantó como un hombre y se quedó ahí, porque dicen que si sale de aquí, entonces sí se muere. Y no le hizo el juego ni a los de adentro ni a los de afuera. Cerró el pico y se trancó en su casa de guarida. Ojalá yo tuviera la mitad de timbales que tiene esa loca. And again, challenging, blaming the young homosexual to the father. I'm about to finish now. So, rethinking, challenging the system. Here's going to challenge, again, the system. I just decided to, this is the big impact it's making in Conde, the heterosexual protagonist. Se sentía deseado con toda, me estaré volviendo maricón, again, destabilizing. And that's basically the conclusions. Showing the official account regarding the integration of homosexuals in Cuba by portraying the problems to integrate them into the revolutionary project, so that homosexuals, for me, still represent a challenge to the stability of the Cuban system. And that's it.
Okay, thank you.